4G, the zero exponent. What do I mean by the zero exponent? Well, what if you have a zero as the exponent? 5 to the 0. Well, what does an exponent tell you to do? It says to take this value, or this many of that value, and multiply them together. So I need to take 0 5s and multiply them together. So that means I take this, this emptiness, and multiply it together, because 0 5s is no 5s. So that's a zero exponent. Well, what's the result then? Well, in mathematics, if you have a value a raised to the 0th power with an exponent of 0, we define that as being equal to 1. Where a is not equal to 0. So if we take any number other than 0 and raise it to the 0th power, we define it as 1. That's a semicolon, not a J. Okay? Well, let's just do a little aside here. Well, what if we raise 0 to any power? What do we get? 0 raised to any power, 0 times 0 times 0 times 0 times 0 always gives you 0, right? Any number multiplied by 0 is 0. So that's 0. Another semicolon. Where n is not equal to 0. Because how can you take 0 zeros? Well, what if I have 0 to the 0th power? If I have 0 to the 0th power, if we allowed a to be equal to 0, then 0 to the 0th power would be equal to 1, because any number raised to the 0th power is 1. If we allowed n to be equal to 0, we'd have 0 to the 0th power is equal to 0, because 0 raised to any power is 0. And here we see a contradiction. If we were to allow 0 to the 0th power to be part of this, we would see that we have a contradiction. It would be both 1 and 0 at the same time. Therefore, 0 to the 0th power is undefined. It's what we sometimes refer to as a discontinuity. Any number raised to the 0th power is 1, but then when you get to a equal to 0, it falls apart. So we don't have a point that works there. Any 0 raised to any power is 0 until n equals 0, until n is equal to 0, and it falls apart. So 0 to the 0th power is undefined. So that's interesting, isn't it? So how does that affect us when we're doing math? Actually, it makes things really nice. -5 to the 0th power. Any number raised to the 0th power is 1. 6,942 to the 0th power. Any number raised to the 0th power is 1. So it doesn't matter how big or small, if it's raised to the 0th power, it's 1, as long as you're not raising 0 to the 0th power. What if I have -8 to the 0th power? Now remember, any number raised to the 0th power is 1. But be careful here, because order of operations says that exponent comes first, right? So 8 to the 0 is 1. But then this says to negate the result. Whereas if I'd said -8 to the 0th power, then this number raised to the 0th power would be +1. So be careful, it's the same thing that we just talked about with the difference between -5 squared and -5 squared. Right? Exponent comes first, that becomes 1, and then we negate it. This, we go into the 0th power, becomes 1. So what if I make this a little more complicated? $752.4 divided by 8.6 over 9,007.16 plus 42.9, all raised to the 0th power. All I have to do is look at this and go, that numerator is not 0. This divided by that is not going to give me 0. Therefore, this is going to give me some number other than 0. Any number raised to the 0th power is 1. Isn't that nice? I saw that 0th power, all I had to do was verify that this did not come out to 0. What about this one? Okay, so I've got x times 2 over 24 divided by 3. And actually, let me make that 48 divided by 3 plus -1. So 8 times 2 over 48 divided by 3 plus -1. All of that raised to the 0th power. 8 times 2 is 16. 48 divided by 3 is 16, leaving me with 16 over 16 plus -3, all of that raised to the 0th power. 16 divided by 16 is 1. Why did I put a 3 there? You guys need to catch me on this. Okay, -1. I had 3 in my mind from that, I guess. So 16 divided by 16 is 1. That's a square bracket that did not come out square. So that's 1 plus -1 raised to the 0th power. If you add a number and its additive inverse, you get 0. But if we just look at that and go, okay, well 1 plus -1, the signs are different, so we're going to subtract. 1 minus 1 is 0. Sign would be negative, but 0 is 0, so we end up with 0 to the 0th power, undefined. By definition, 0 to the 0th power is undefined. But that's it, the 0 exponent. Any number raised to the 0th power is 1, except for 0 raised to the 0th power is undefined. Just make sure that you use order of operations, so if you have a negation that happens outside, or anything else of that sort, that you don't just turn it into 1 when it should be -1 or multiplied by something else.